Good morning, everyone. I'm Candy Swift, and when Pastor Joel asked me to share my story, of course I said yes, because in Peter, we're encouraged to be ready always to give an answer to every man that asks for the reason of their hope in our lives. And so today I hope that in hearing my story, you will understand the hope that Jesus can bring to your life. You might notice that I'm a little bit weepy. I'm always humbled by how amazing God is, and how one of my favorite verses in the Bible is Psalm 27:10. It says, 27:1 says, "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear?" And verse 10 says, "When my father and mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up." And as you listen to my story, you'll see that the people who were supposed to be taking care of me and protecting me either couldn't or wouldn't. And so God has become a very special father to me, and he's put people in my life, father figures in my life, that show what a healthy father is and can be. So I grew up in a pretty conservative home. We went to church, Sunday school, vacation Bible school. We memorized verses. My mom shared the gospel with me when I was 5, and I prayed and received Christ at that time. And so it seems like life should be great and hunky-dory, right? Everything should be fine. But that's the outside. Inside, life was crazy. My dad had a very bad temper. I believe he was probably abused as a child. I believe he was probably abused as a child, and he continued that. It was very unpredictable. Sometimes it would be just a great conversation. All of a sudden, the table would be upended, and then we'd be forced to clean it up. And so life was like walking on eggshells pretty much my whole life. We didn't have a TV, even though TVs did exist when I was a child. But my dad got mad one day and smashed our TV. So one of the very favorite activities that we had growing up was every 8 o'clock at night, we would listen to Unshackled. It's a radio drama produced by the Pacific Garden Mission in Chicago, Illinois, about people whose lives, women and men who had come to the mission and were at the bottom, and God transformed their lives. So growing up, I heard about all of this great things that God can do, and I believe that he could do it, but somehow I didn't seem like it was that way in my life at the moment. I was a good girl. I went to school. I did my homework. I grew up as the oldest of 12 children, so I had a lot of responsibilities. One day, in my senior, we had several incidences where social services came and intervened in some ways, sometimes took us out of the home. But one special time when I was in my senior year, my dad came home screaming, "I'm going crazy, call the psychiatrist, I'm going to kill someone." And he broke a chair and threatened my 2-year-old brother. And the police came, but he wouldn't let them in the house. And so I was in the bathroom looking out the window trying to see when they were going to come in and get us out of here, and they just drove off. And I felt pretty hopeless at that moment. I was like, I don't know what he's going to do. As it turns out, when my father would rage, it would take, he'd rage, and then he'd run out of steam and he'd fall asleep. And so we just prayed that we just tried to be invisible and let him fall asleep. And in the meantime, it seems my mom was contacting somebody. We all went to bed, and my dad got up and he opened my door and he said, "I could have killed all of you tonight and nobody would have cared." But that's not true. That's not true. God cares. He cares today. He cared then. As it turns out, my mom had gotten in touch with the police and social services, and they come in the middle of the night and took us out and put us into a protective situation. I never went home after that. During that time, it came out that there was even a darker secret in our family. One of my sisters shared that not only were we being physically abused, but that my father was actually sexually abusing several of us, including myself. And looking back on that, I wonder, why didn't I say anything? People asked me. In fact, my mom said, "How come you didn't tell me?" And it was so obvious to me when it was happening to either me or my siblings that I thought she just knew and couldn't do anything, or maybe wouldn't do anything. I felt like I couldn't do anything because he said, if you tell anybody, no one will care. No one will know. They won't believe you. And I knew that if I told, the anger would come out. So I was kind of stuck. I didn't have a way to escape. But when social services came that night and took us, I felt like this was my freedom. Finally, I was free. I was going to be able to live my life, and I was excited. I was put into a foster home, finished up my senior year. My other siblings were in different places. In order to protect myself, I sort of cut ties with my family for a while, and I feel bad about that because my siblings feel a little bit abandoned by that. But I feel like I had to sort of heal a little bit myself before I could help them. As it turns out, my dad was convicted of child abuse. He got 35 years in prison for 5 counts of child molestation. 3 of me, 2 of my sisters, and 2 of my brothers. There were others, I think, but somehow they weren't. He wasn't charged for them. So I'm trying to live my life, trying to find out my way. But as it turns out, I realized I didn't have the tools I needed to survive in a healthy relationship, in healthy relationships. As it turns out, I had anger issues also. I learned to manipulate situations. I learned to stuff my feelings. I learned to, when I didn't get my way and I would get frustrated and it would just come out, I did sometimes lash out. I lashed out verbally, I cried, or sometimes I lashed out physically. And at one point, I was working in Memphis at a theater and had an incident with one of the cast members. And I was embarrassed because I had done something wrong and it made him look bad on stage, and I was going to apologize. And when I feel uncomfortable, what I do is I smile because it just, I don't know, helps me feel to like reduce the awkwardness or something. And so he felt like I wasn't truly sorry for what I had done, and he told me I was lying. And it just like, I don't know where it came from, but I just slapped him. And this is an ex-Marine who is not like someone that you play around with. And looking in his eyes, I was like, oh my, I'm gonna die. But as it turns out, God was in that situation. And through some intervention from the producer and the director, this man and I were able to have a healthy resolution. We continued on. He didn't. In fact, he ended up going to church as a little while later and turned his life over to the Lord. But as a result of this, the director of our theater said that I needed to get some help. And so he set me up to go and talk with a counselor that was a friend of the theater. She was a New Age counselor, so it was a little unconventional. But I think it was a good start. And then I went to 10 sessions with her, and then she recommended that I go to Adult Children of Alcoholics, which is a great program. It has its roots in the Catholic Church. The first few steps are actually very biblical about realizing that my life is unmanageable, and that the second step is that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity. I believe that those are true. But then it falls short because it doesn't recognize the power of God as God. That higher power could be anything. And so after some time with adult children of alcoholics, I realized that what I needed to do was I needed to turn back to God. Like I said earlier, I had received Christ as my Savior when I was 5. But up till then, I hadn't really recognized him as the Lord of my life. And so I began looking for churches, and I ended up in this one church. I ended up at this church. I was late getting there, and nobody was there. But when I walked in, it was as if God was just standing there with his arms open, saying, I've been waiting for you. Welcome home. And since then, the tears have just been pouring out. People ask me, how did you turn out so normal with such a background? And the truth is, I'm not normal. I'm broken. I was broken then, and I'm still broken. God's still working on me. But the good thing is that God is in the business of healing broken hearts. He's in the business of mending broken relationships. And so the next step was a very special friend, Sandra, began to mentor me and disciple me. And she said, you know, you need to forgive your father. And I was like, oh, no way. I can't. I don't want to. And she said, pray about it. So I said, okay, I can pray about it. And so for about a year, I prayed regularly. God, please help me forgive my father. I don't know how I can do it because I don't want to. And then one Sunday, we were having a praise service, and I was praising God, and it just felt like this backpack of hate and shame was lifted off of my back. And I went running to my friend. I said, I feel like God has given me forgiveness for my father. And she said, that's wonderful. Now you have to tell him. Oh, no, I can't do that. At that time, he was in jail. And, yeah, he was in jail. And I talked to my grandmother. She said, okay, well, we go and visit your dad every other week or something like that. You can go with us. But I was so scared because I didn't know what was going to happen. I just didn't know what was going to happen. I hadn't had to testify against him, so I was glad about that. But I just didn't know what he was going to do. I don't know what the situation was going to be like. So I went with my grandmother. Our pastor had given us this verse. It's 2 Timothy 1:7. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And so as I went on the way to the prison, my grandmother and I were just praying the whole time. And I felt a peace going there. Hearing the clanging doors was a little bit scary. But when I saw my dad, it was open. I was really scared because I thought he could just jump over that counter and get me, but he didn't. I told him that I had forgiven him and that I was planning to go overseas to be a missionary. And he was really repentant, and he said that he was sorry for what he had done. And but you know what? Even if he hadn't said that he was sorry, it didn't matter, because the forgiveness was not for him to say sorry back to me. The forgiveness was for me to let him off the hook so that God could work in my life. And so, yeah. God has a sense of humor too, because a few years ago when I was back in the States, my dad was sick, and I was given the opportunity to take care of him. And again, I had to pray because I didn't know if I could really do that. But as it turns out, God gave me the compassion to take care of my father, even in situations where I had to be in the places alone with him. God protected me, and it was really a testimony of how God had given me forgiveness and had restored that relationship. Your story might not be the same as mine, but I know that the human condition is the same. We're all looking for purpose, we're looking for love, we're looking for hope, and that only comes through Jesus Christ and the work that he's done on the cross. So the price has been paid. If you've accepted it already, let him work through you and see what he wants you to do next. If you haven't accepted that yet, pray and let him come into your life and restore your relationship with him so that he can restore your relationships with other people.